I woke up that morning to silence that felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath before telling me something I didn't want to hear. And when I reached for my phone, there were no cheerful notifications. No texts from my sister like she used to send, only a string of emails from the bank that made my blood run cold. Transactions I didn't authorize, withdrawals I couldn't explain, thousands disappearing in a blur of numbers that felt like watching my life being drained away in real time. And before I even finished scrolling, my stomach dropped because deep down, I already knew who had done it, even though I begged myself to be wrong. But then the voicemail played, her laugh echoing with his in the background, a quick click before the line cut. And in that moment, my heart cracked, not just from the theft, but from the betrayal, because she wasn't just my sister. She was the one person I thought would never choose a man over me, never vanish with my entire savings, like I was just another stranger she could rob and leave behind. And yet, as I sat there clutching my phone, my hands trembling, one thought cut through the heartbreak like a blade. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of hers unraveling. The first hours after discovering everything were a blur, like moving through water where every sound was muffled and every motion felt delayed. But the reality of what had happened settled on me heavier with each passing minute, suffocating me in a way I couldn't shake. My sister, my own blood, had waited until my guard was down, until I was too busy to check my accounts for a few days, and then drained them with the precision of someone who had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Every penny I had saved from my teaching job, every late night of grading papers, every careful decision to skip luxuries so I could build something stable, it was gone, funneled straight into an account I couldn't trace. And then she was gone too, off with that boyfriend of hers who always had a sly smile I never trusted. I thought back to the countless times I had defended her to our parents, to friends who said she was reckless, irresponsible, selfish. I had said, she's just young, she's figuring it out, she'll grow out of it. I had believed in her when no one else did. I had covered for her rent once when she blew her paycheck on clothes. I had paid her phone bill. I'd even given her my car keys when she swore she needed it for a job interview, only to find out later she'd gone on a weekend trip with him instead. Each memory now replayed like a cruel reminder of the pattern I had ignored, the red flags I had chosen to believe were misunderstandings. But this wasn't just a mistake or poor judgment. This was deliberate. This was her deciding I was worth sacrificing for a getaway with a man who whispered promises of freedom and adventure while leaning on her to finance it. My phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't the bank. It was my landlord reminding me that rent was due in 2 days. Panic surged through me as I realized the full scope of what she had done. Not just betrayal, not just theft, but sabotage of my entire stability. She hadn't just taken my savings. She had taken my safety net, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, and alone. Yet in the middle of that spiraling fear, a strange clarity formed. If she had thought I was weak enough to crumble, she didn't know me at all. She might have run with my money, but she had no idea what I was capable of when everything I had worked for was stripped away. And if she thought she'd disappear quietly into a new life, she had underestimated the one person who knew every secret, every lie, every habit she couldn't break. Because while I sat in that tiny apartment staring at my emptied accounts, I wasn't just heartbroken, I was taking inventory, and I was about to make sure that she would never see this as a victory. The following days stretched into a haze of phone calls, paperwork, and restless nights where sleep wouldn't come no matter how tightly I shut my eyes, because the betrayal replayed like a cruel film behind my eyelids. I marched into the bank with trembling hands, clutching my ID, the account statements, and the sick knowledge that the withdrawals bore her signature, her authorization codes, all of it disguised in a way only someone who had seen me enter my password countless times could pull off. The banker's polite tone couldn't hide the pity in her eyes when she told me that because my sister was technically a secondary user I had once added to my account, I would face an uphill battle proving theft. I wanted to scream. I had added her in what I thought was an act of love, a way to help her rebuild her credit after she tanked it with late payments and unpaid cards. I thought I was giving her a chance. Instead, I had handed her the weapon she used to burn me to the ground. My parents, when I called them, weren't much better. "She's your sister," my father sighed, his voice lined with exasperation, as though this was a minor squabble over borrowed clothes and not a deliberate financial betrayal. "You two need to work this out between yourselves." My mother added, You can't call the police on family." Their words cut deeper than I expected, because they revealed what I had always known but never wanted to face. In their eyes, my role was to forgive, to absorb, to keep the peace no matter what my sister did. The golden child versus the responsible one, the wild spirit versus the steady anchor. I had been cast as the babysitter of her chaos, and they had no intention of intervening. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the glow of my laptop burning into my tired eyes, scrolling through social media, desperate for a clue. And then I saw it, a tagged photo of her and her boyfriend in a club 2 states away. Her drink raised in triumph, his arm draped over her shoulders, the caption boasting about new beginnings and leaving the past behind. Rage surged through me, sharper than grief. They hadn't vanished. They were flaunting it. They thought I would sit quietly, licking my wounds, while they danced on the ashes of my trust. But they didn't know me, not really. They didn't know that every smile, every caption, every careless breadcrumb they left online was evidence, and I was collecting it all. I started a file, screenshots of photos, timestamps of transactions, every detail that tied their pleasure trips to the money that wasn't theirs. With each piece of proof I saved, my heartbreak hardened into something sharper, something with edges. They thought I was the quiet one, the forgiving one. But quiet doesn't mean weak, and forgiveness has limits. The more I dug, the more I realized I wasn't just going to get back what she stole. I was going to make sure she understood that you don't burn the one bridge that has carried you your whole life without consequences. I remember the exact moment when my despair shifted into resolve. It was 3 a.m, my apartment dark except for the glow of the laptop screen, and I was hunched over it like a detective in a crime drama. My eyes dry from staring too long, but my pulse steady. I'd pieced together a timeline, money pulled from my accounts, purchases made, locations tagged, receipts emailed. My sister wasn't just reckless, she was sloppy, leaving a digital trail a child could follow. The withdrawals matched her travel. The shopping sprees lined up with his birthday. The hotel check-ins mirrored the missing sums from my savings. It wasn't just betrayal, it was evidence. Hard, undeniable proof. That night, I realized something else. She hadn't anticipated I would fight back because, for so long, I never had. When she borrowed and never repaid, I stayed quiet. When she lied and I covered for her, I kept my mouth shut. When she failed and our parents blamed me for not helping enough, I absorbed the guilt. But now she had taken everything, and in stripping me bare, she had freed me from the role she always boxed me into. I no longer had anything left to lose by telling the truth. I filed a police report, not with tears or apologies, but with a clear voice, handing over the folder I had compiled with screenshots, bank statements, and timestamps. The officer raised his eyebrows as he flipped through the thick stack. "She's your sister?" he asked, like family was supposed to make it less of a crime. I met his gaze without flinching. "She was." That single sentence seemed to shift something in me, as if I'd drawn a permanent line in the sand. Word spread quickly after that. My parents were furious, calling me dramatic, selfish, unforgiving. "You'll ruin her life," my mother hissed on the phone, her voice sharp with a kind of anger she had never directed at my sister, but reserved fully for me. But I didn't apologize. "Not this time," I told her calmly. "She ruined mine first." And then I hung up. The silence after that was heavy, but it was also the first silence that felt like mine, not theirs. Within weeks, the case gained traction because the amounts she had taken weren't small. They crossed the line from a family squabble into a felony. Subpoenas went out. The investigation pulled records I could only guess at, and slowly, piece by piece, her little fantasy life with him began to collapse. Credit cards flagged, flights canceled, hotel bookings questioned. And me, the one she thought would sit quietly and lick her wounds, was the one dismantling it all brick by brick. Each update I received from the investigator wasn't just information, it was vindication. Proof that I hadn't been crazy, that my heartbreak wasn't just an overreaction, but a crime that demanded justice. And with every detail that came to light, I felt myself growing lighter, stronger, ready not just to survive this, but to make sure that when my sister looked back on this choice, she would know it was the single worst decision of her life. The hearing started months later, and by then I was no longer the trembling woman staring at empty accounts in shock. I was composed, armed with documents, recordings, and the quiet power that comes from refusing to be silenced. My sister entered the courtroom in heels too high for her balance, clinging to her boyfriend's arm like he was still her knight in shining armor. though his eyes darted nervously at every uniform in the room. She smirked when she saw me, as if this was still a family spat she could charm her way out of. But her smirk faltered when the prosecutor slid stacks of evidence across the table, each page carrying her name, her signature, her reckless selfies with designer bags captioned with dates that aligned perfectly with bank withdrawals. Watching her squirm under questioning was a twisted kind of heartbreak. This was the same girl I once braided hair for before school, the same sister I defended from bullies. But the girl in front of me now was someone else entirely, unrepentant, arrogant, and suddenly exposed. My parents sat behind her, their eyes avoiding mine, their arms crossed as though they were the true victims here. When my mother took the stand to testify on my sister's behalf, her voice dripping with excuses. She didn't mean it. She was under pressure. She thought she'd pay it back. I didn't flinch. I simply waited for my turn, and when it came, I spoke with clarity. I told the court exactly what had happened, how much was taken, how long it had gone on, and how thoroughly she had planned it. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I laid out the facts like stepping stones across a river, each one leading to the undeniable conclusion that this wasn't a mistake. It was theft, intentional and cruel. The defense tried to twist it, to make it seem like I had enabled her, like I was overreacting, like this was just a private matter. But the receipts spoke louder than their words. Every charge she couldn't explain, every flight she couldn't deny, every hotel that coincided with the money missing from my account, it was all there in black and white. By the time the judge looked at her, even she couldn't muster her usual bravado. She fidgeted, her boyfriend pale beside her, his bravado long gone. The ruling was clear. Restitution, probation, a record that would follow her wherever she went. My sister's eyes met mine only once after that, and what I saw wasn't apology or regret. It was rage, the fury of someone who realized the person she always underestimated had finally stood up. But instead of shrinking under it, I let her glare wash over me. I knew this wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about ending a lifetime of being the fallback, the scapegoat, the one who always sacrificed. This was my line in the sand, permanent and immovable. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing family. Because family doesn't destroy you and expect forgiveness. They don't get to anymore. After the ruling, life didn't snap back to normal the way I once naively hoped it might. There was no neat closure ribboned in forgiveness. No reunion over coffee where she explained herself and I softened. What came instead was silence. Heavy, loaded silence from my parents who decided to cut me off rather than accept that their golden child had shattered the image they clung to. My mother's last message to me before blocking my number was short and brutal. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family. At first, those words stabbed deep, twisting inside me like shards of glass. But with time, I realized how telling they were. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had just stopped pretending. The family image they worshipped was a facade, propped up on my sacrifices and my silence. I had simply stopped carrying the weight of their denial. In that emptiness, I built something new. I moved into a smaller place, just mine, decorated on my terms with secondhand furniture I saved for piece by piece. Each corner I filled was a quiet declaration of independence, a bookshelf lined with my own purchases, a table I had paid for myself, plants thriving because I finally had the space to tend to them without distraction. I threw myself into my work, and with the clarity of having no one to siphon from me, I advanced faster than I thought possible. Opportunities came that I once would have declined for fear of leaving my sister behind. This time I said yes. My students thrived under my focus, and the recognition I received became not just professional, but personal, a reminder that my dedication had always been worth more than their dismissals. Meanwhile, updates about my sister trickled in through whispers and mutual acquaintances. She and her boyfriend didn't last long under the strain of probation and restitution. The sparkle of their stolen freedom dulled fast when real life demanded responsibility. She bounced from job to job, her reputation shadowed by the record she had earned. And though some part of me once longed for her apology, it never came. What came instead was her silence, her avoidance, her refusal to acknowledge the ruin she left in her wake. And I realized I didn't need her apology, I didn't need her acknowledgement. I didn't need their acceptance. What I needed, I had already given myself. The choice to draw boundaries, to protect my life, to claim my own worth without waiting for permission. For the first time, I wasn't living in reaction to her chaos. I was living for me. And as much as they wanted me to believe I'd destroyed something sacred, the truth was simpler and sharper. I had walked away from a house already on fire, and finally, I was breathing clean air. Months turned into a year, and what once felt like an open wound became more like a scar. Visible, yes, but no longer bleeding, no longer dictating every breath I took. The distance from my family was both painful and liberating, like pulling a thorn embedded too deep. The ache lingered, but so did the relief of no longer being pierced daily. My parents still sent the occasional guilt-ridden holiday card, words dripping with passive accusations about family unity and sisters forgiving each other, but I never replied. Each unopened envelope went straight into a box I labeled evidence of who they really are. I wasn't going to let nostalgia trick me into reopening old wounds. What surprised me most was how quickly my life began to thrive without their weight. Freed from constant drama, I started taking risks I once would have deemed irresponsible, signing up for a summer seminar abroad, applying for a fellowship I assumed was out of reach, even daring to imagine buying a place of my own someday. For the first time, my finances were mine alone, untouched by my sister's manipulations, and I guarded them fiercely, setting boundaries so clear they could have been carved into stone. No cosigners. No just alone, no exceptions. And in those boundaries, I found not loneliness, but strength. The more I lived on my own terms, the more I realized how much of my life had been orchestrated around keeping her afloat, my own dreams postponed so she wouldn't drown. But without her tether, I wasn't sinking. I was soaring. Sometimes I'd stumble across her online presence, an old account not yet deleted, a tagged photo at a bar, a half-hearted attempt at a new job. Always she looked the same, trying to smile, but the edges frayed, the glow gone. And though once that might have filled me with bitterness or triumph, now it only filled me with clarity. Her downfall wasn't my victory, it was her consequence. My victory was quieter, more enduring. It was in every morning I woke without dread, every bill paid with money I had earned, every student who looked at me with respect, every plan I made for a future I chose. She thought emptying my accounts would empty me, that vanishing would leave me broken. But all she did was force me to see how strong I could be when I stopped carrying her. And that strength wasn't temporary. It was mine. Permanent. Unshakable. Built from surviving what should have shattered me. By the second year, the story of my sister's betrayal no longer defined me, but it did shape the way I carried myself through the world. I became someone sharper, less naive, unwilling to hand out blind trust simply because of shared blood. When colleagues asked why I seemed so composed under pressure, why I never flinched at sudden challenges, I would smile faintly, because they had no idea I had already lived through a storm that stripped me bare and forced me to rebuild from the ground up. My life, once cluttered with her chaos, became intentional. I traveled for the first time not out of obligation, but out of choice, wandering through cities with a camera in hand, buying small souvenirs I didn't need, but finally allowed myself to enjoy. I laughed more, real laughter, not the forced kind I once used to smooth over my sister's disasters. And slowly, a circle of new people gathered around me. Friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. Colleagues who respected my boundaries. Neighbors who shared dinners without hidden agendas. They didn't drain me, they filled me. And in that balance, I learned what family was supposed to feel like. Every so often, my phone would buzz with an unknown number, and when I answered, silence lingered on the other end, the kind that felt too familiar. I always hung up before she spoke, if it was her. Not because I was afraid of what she'd say, but because I no longer needed to hear it. Closure doesn't always come in apologies. Sometimes it comes in the strength to refuse the same cycle again. My sister had once called me her safety net, a phrase that used to feel like endearment. But now I saw it for what it was. A rope around my neck, dragging me down while she bounced freely above. That rope was cut, and I wasn't going to tie it back together. The more distance I put between myself and the wreckage of who I used to be, the more I realized she had given me something she never intended. Freedom. In trying to ruin me, she had released me. She had shown me that survival wasn't about clinging to broken bonds, but about knowing when to let them burn and walking away without turning back. 3 years later, when I think back to the night I found my accounts empty, I don't see the hollow despair anymore. I see it as the pivot point. The night my life split in two. The version of me who lived as her caretaker, and the version of me who finally chose herself. The woman I've become since then is someone my sister wouldn't recognize. Steady, unyielding, quietly proud. I own my own place now, small but filled with light, a space that belongs entirely to me. Every wall and piece of furniture tells a story of resilience, of rebuilding not just finances, but an entire identity that had been eroded by years of enabling. My work has flourished. I was promoted into a role I once never thought I'd be considered for, mentoring younger teachers who remind me daily that purpose doesn't always need to come from family. It can come from impact, from the lives we touch when we show up fully. And as I guide them, I silently remind myself, no one will ever reduce me to a babysitter again. The whispers about my sister still surface now and then, another job lost, another relationship soured, another failed attempt to reinvent herself without doing the work. She tried reaching out once, a letter scribbled in hurried handwriting, half apology, half accusation, as though I owed her a chance at redemption. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Some doors, once closed, should never be reopened, because the cost of walking back through them is too high. My parents remain distant, still choosing denial over truth, still blaming me for drawing the line. And though a part of me grieves the family I once imagined we could be, another part knows I finally broke free from a role I was never meant to play. The revenge they think I enacted by pressing charges was never really about punishment. It was about boundaries, about finally saying, enough. My life is my own, and I've built it stronger than before, brick by brick, choice by choice. So when people ask me now if I regret what I did, if I regret not forgiving her, my answer is simple. I regret waiting so long to choose myself. And maybe that's the only regret I'll ever carry, because everything else, every scar, every silence, every loss, became the foundation of a life that is finally, irrevocably mine. And now I'll ask you, the women listening, if your sister, your brother, or anyone you love betrayed you in a way that stripped you bare, would you forgive and risk being broken again? Or would you draw the line and rebuild without them? When I finally stood far enough away from the chaos to see the bigger picture, I realized that my sister's betrayal had been building long before she emptied my accounts. It was written into every small decision I made to cover for her, every moment I silenced my own needs so she could take center stage. It wasn't about the money, not really. The money was just the final act, the undeniable proof of what had been true for years. She didn't see me as her sister. She saw me as her resource, her fallback, the invisible scaffolding propping up her life. And when she tore that scaffolding down, I saw her for who she was, and myself for who I could become without her weight. The hardest part wasn't the trial or the restitution or even losing my parents' approval. The hardest part was sitting with the emptiness afterward, the kind that crept in late at night when the apartment was quiet, and I caught myself remembering the way we used to laugh together as kids, our whispered secrets under the covers, the promises that we'd always protect each other. I had to grieve not just the sister I lost, but the sister I thought I had, the one who never truly existed. And that grief was sharp, but it also carved out space in me for something new. Slowly, that space filled with unexpected joys. A colleague who became a friend. A hobby that turned into a passion. A trip that turned into a tradition. I learned that family can be chosen, and loyalty can be mutual, not demanded. And through it all, I stopped apologizing for protecting myself. The world didn't collapse because I said no. In fact, it opened. I still get questions from people who hear my story, "Don't you miss her? Don't you want her back in your life?" And I answer with honesty, I miss the idea of her, not the reality. The reality was betrayal, chaos, lies. The idea was love, trust, safety. I deserve the reality of those things, not the illusion. And I'll never settle for less again. My sister thought she was stealing my future when she emptied my accounts, but in the end, she only stripped away the illusions I was too afraid to let go of. She gave me clarity, and clarity is a gift I wouldn't trade for anything, not even the money she stole. Looking back now, I can finally say that what once felt like the end of my world was really the beginning of my own life, lived fully on my terms. My sister may have vanished with my savings, but I've built something far greater in her absence. A life that no one else controls, a future that belongs only to me. The people who once doubted me now see me thriving, not because I chased revenge in its ugliest sense, but because I chose boundaries, because I chose myself over the role they tried to trap me in. I stopped being the safety net, the family ATM, the one who sacrificed silently while others took and took. And instead, I became the woman who stood up, who documented every receipt, who faced a courtroom without trembling, who reclaimed her voice after years of being told to hush. My sister thought I would crumble under the weight of betrayal, but instead I grew stronger than she ever imagined. She gave me scars, yes, but those scars are proof that I survived, that I rebuilt, that I rose without her. Today, I am not defined by what she took, but by what I've created since. The independence, the peace, the unshakable self-worth that no one can drain from me again. And maybe that is the truest form of revenge, living fully, unapologetically, in a life she no longer has the power to touch. So I'll leave you with this. If someone close to you crossed a line so deep it shattered your trust, would you give them another chance? Or would you choose, as I did, to walk away and never look back?